in the U.S., right, we're seeing that there is, greater interest in renewable diesel. Okay, that's starting to really develop a lot more, particularly in Louisiana. Neste, as you know, is like a dominant player worldwide. But we have two other players now. They're starting to emerge in the U.S. So has Shell had a chance to really explore, say, renewable diesel as a viable option?
Not my area of expertise,
Okay.
but I think Shell's efforts are much more focused on the use of biodiesel, as we said, liquefied natural gas and hydrogen as the three main sort of routes into a more sustainable future. As I think Richard said, and I probably said as well actually, we can't imagine any one of those technologies alone being a single solution for the future, not least because the intricacies of the different markets bolt together in different ways. The infrastructures might not be there. Thinking about renewable fuels in the sense that you meant it, so say heavy vegetable oil, it's not obvious to me that the volumes would be there either. As I doubt you could make that the sole stream of things. So, I know in the UK, for example, they've had cooking oil being gathered and being re-refined and reprocessed, but the volumes compared to the huge amounts that you need will be tiny. So I wouldn't discount it as a fuel of interest, but not a fuel of major contribution, is my understanding. And I think the move towards liquefied natural gas for heavy-duty transport is a good one because it's less intense on carbon. So per kilowatt of power generated produces less CO2. Hydrogen is a very interesting one too. I mean, as I'm sure you know, it takes energy to produce hydrogen. So you can do it by steam methane. Well, so you could do it electrically through electrolysis from solar and wind and so on. You can do it by a thing called steam methane reforming as well. But both things need energy, and you then need energy infrastructure. And running forward to 2050 and beyond, the amounts of energy that you'll need for that are high. So it's quite a tortuous journey, I think, and the investment you need in the renewable energy provision to make the hydrogen is going to be high. And then the infrastructure to transport the hydrogen is not in place either at the moment, very little of it. So I think in the UK we've got just one hydrogen refueling station in a place called Cobham, which is, I think, just to the north of Heathrow Airport. So if you owned a hydrogen car, it can only be around Cobham. It can't go very much further. So again, that's a long way to go. And in the passenger car space, Toyota are keen on fuel cell electric vehicles, and they've been spoken about in heavy duty trucks as well. But again, the hydrogen infrastructure thing still prevails. So I don't think it's good to lock in on any one solution at the moment. You need to keep that mosaic, see which ones evolve. And that's the sort of pull from the customer, the infrastructure development, the refining bits, the access to renewable electricity. And I don't think anybody really will be bold enough to place a bet on any of those at the moment.
In diesel, as you know, I mean, the emissions have gotten, so much better, greater improvements there.
Yeah.
And so I think it was a few years back that Shell had said, say by 2050, still on the road, about 2/3 of the vehicles going to be petroleum based still. So Shell's still feeling pretty secure then in that prediction that more or less 2050 we're still going to have a majority petroleum based.
Okay. Let me think. So for passenger car, just in the question and answer session after lunch, I described what's happening there. So the total number of cars in the market continues to increase at about 2% a year. And if you compound that, like compound interest up till 2050, we'll probably have about 1.6 billion cars on the road worldwide compared to 1 billion today. In about 2045, 2050, that's the time when the maximum number of engines in the world for cars will peak. But at the same time, you've got an increasing number of electric vehicles on top of that. But that means that you've got both things growing in parallel, an increased need for electrification an increased need for regular or evolving engines. And as I said, peaking in 2045, 2050 or so. So that doesn't mean that fuel volumes are going to decrease, rather the opposite actually, I think, at least out to 2050. For trucks it's very much harder because the amount of energy they need to go the distances that they need to go, long haul freight, is very much larger. So I think as things stand, battery energy density isn't high enough to propel trucks far enough without reducing the payload of the truck very substantially. So I think a key development that's required there is improving battery technology that makes their energy density higher and their cost per energy lower. And like Moore's law for computers, those things are evolving, but they need to go a long way, I feel, before freight transport in the Class 8 American truck will be able to access those. And in that sense, I think hydrogen has its attractions, but it has the challenges we just mentioned. LNG seems like a stepping stone, and I don't know about the States, but I know in Europe there's 150 odd Shell LNG stations positioned on main arterial routes around. So again, sort of evolving infrastructure, customer pull, so on, all in parallel.
So interesting, you mentioned FCA or Chrysler. Okay, so relationship with them. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that in terms of, say, lubrication development?
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, we do a lot of things with Chrysler, and I don't think many of those things you'd be surprised about. So, improved fuel efficiency of engines is an important one. So, all of the American OEMs, all of the European OEMs get fined roughly 95 euros per gram per kilometre that they are over the CO2 limit or the fuel consumption limit. So for a company the size of Volkswagen, Chrysler and so on, that can come to billions of dollars if they don't comply. So the pressure is very, very high. To a degree, lubricants are seen as low-hanging fruit. So if you can change the lubricant and not change the hardware, you've gained CO2 or reduce CO2 rather, and that's saving you money from developing your engine. So that's a nice transaction between Shell and an OEM. But that doesn't really count as the co-engineering thing I spoke about this morning, which is where the hardware is changed as well. So the thing to remember there is that you can design a lubricant to support a change in hardware, where it's the hardware change which is improving the efficiency. And a common one for passenger car would be more intense turbocharging or reducing sweat volume and reducing engine speed. And they generally make lubrication more tricky to preserve durability. But if your lubricant can, then your engine takes advantage of all of those other things and the lubricants enabled it. So that sort of thing's going on, and I expect more of that to take place in the heavy duty sector.
Okay.
But there, the role of the lubricant for efficiency from a direct friction effect is smaller than it is in a passenger car, because the loads carried by the engine are very much higher. So the fraction of the load that is frictionless is smaller. So the credit you get from changing the lubricants is smaller. But enabling the technologies that give you fuel economy, that there's a big value to be played there.
Okay, so interesting. All right, Shell's acquisition of Sonnet, right, the battery manufacturer in Germany. This is interesting. Of course, you combine that with Shell's charging infrastructure, which is growing, and a lot of people are wondering, okay, is Shell going to be going a little further and further into that EV space and possibly be manufacturing batteries for EVs before too long?
Okay. I don't know if they are. I've not heard that they are, and I would actually be surprised if they do. But I don't have a solid answer for that.
Okay.
I know that we are involved in the development of the hydrocarbon fluids and possibly the water-based cooling fluids that infrastructure of charging requires.
Okay.
So if you own, let's say you own a Tesla. Or you own a truck for that matter, and your mission is to charge it in fewer than 10 minutes. you need a very, very high rate of charge and a high current flow and a high voltage. I squared R heats up the battery, heats up the charger, and you need to cool it.
Yes.
Otherwise, you can't shove that amount of power in. So hydrocarbon fluids can act as coolants. Water and glycol can act as fluids as long as they're defended from the electrical conductors. So that's the charging side. The battery itself, receiving that current, will warm up. So you need to do that. And the battery temperature range is very narrow. I think typically between sort of 30 and 40 centigrade, maybe even tighter. You don't want it to stray any further. We're being stopped. So hydrocarbon fluids have a role to play there. And then the protective role of the lubricant throughout the whole of the drivetrain, all the electrical bits, is really important too.
Last question on recycling. Interesting, because there's, as you know, a big market there for used oil recycling. So with the new oils, the CK4 and FA4, have you had a chance to look at the recyclability factor there? And in general, what's Shell's outlook on oil recycling?
Yeah. So again, I don't have any detail on that.
Okay.
But we have an increasing interest in what's called the circular economy, which is playing very much to that. So things coming out of the end, going back into the beginning, and part of that would become re-refining, filtering, reuse, and so on. As best I know, Shell aren't heavy on that at the moment, but that general discussion about the need for circularity and sustainability is very definitely there.